Cash, the lifeblood of modern society. Businesses and individuals alike need money coming in the door or sitting in the bank in order to stay moving from one day to the next. And construction contractors are certainly no exception. Getting a project done requires many different contractors to provide labor, equipment, and materials necessary to get their portion of the work done. And as we all know, any given project is being done for a specific client at the end of the day, whether that be a person, a company, or an organization. The client is ultimately the one holding the purse strings at the end of the day and paying for the work that's being done. So, how do clients go about paying for the work? How do contractors, both general contractors and their subcontractors, go about invoicing the client for this work? And what exactly happens in this process on projects that take months or even years to complete? If these are questions you find yourself asking, then stick around, because I'll be walking you through the entire process, one step at a time. Now, if this is your first time watching my channel, welcome. My name is Patrick, the creator of PM Problems and a construction project manager by trade. And my mission for this channel is to share the knowledge and experiences I've gained over the last 17 years working in commercial construction with new and developing PMs to help them learn, grow, and prosper. And today, we'll be exploring the billing process on a typical commercial construction project. Let's walk through each step in detail so you can understand how contractors go about billing the client for their work as it's being done, what the cash flow on a project typically looks like, and some of the other key details involved in this process. Plus, we'll define some vital terminology along the way. And now, before I begin, I want to give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor, OSHA Campus by 360 Training. If you're in need of an OSHA 10 or 30-hour training course and you wish to get it online, 360 Training offers a variety of flexible, affordable, 100% online options that you can complete on your own schedule from any device. Check out the link in the pinned comment below to learn more or to enroll today. If you sign up using our link, we may receive a small commission, which helps support the channel and keep the lights on. And now, let's get into today's topic. In today's example, we'll be examining a project structure in which a general contractor is constructing a commercial building for a private owner. Let's say that the cost of construction will be $10 million. In order to complete the project, the GC has to hire several subcontractors to perform various aspects of the work required. For simplicity, we won't be talking about any architects, engineers, or other consulting firms that the owner has hired to design or aid in overseeing the work. We'll be focusing purely on contractors performing the work. As a side note, if you'd like to know more about some key differences between general contractors and subcontractors, check out the link in the description below for a video I made breaking it down. Now today, we'll be discussing how money flows from the owner's pockets to the general contractor, and then from the GC to the subcontractors, as work is completed. We'll also talk about the cash contractors need to start the project and to fulfill their own financial obligations as well. Throughout the video, I'll be showing you a graphic representation of costs that contractors incur as the work gets going, and the way clients are billed for it, as well as how money flows from one party to the next. Although I'm stating the obvious, construction projects are performed for profit in nearly all cases, meaning to say, a portion of the total cost to the owner includes profit margins for the GC and their subcontractors to pocket when they hopefully perform the work within or below their respective budgets. As the owner is invoiced for the work, contractors who performed that work will be collecting a portion of overhead and profit margins on top of the true job-specific costs they had to pay to do the work. Or in short, contractors take their true costs for that period and mark them up with overhead and profit margins, and then submit that amount to the owner as their bill. In order for a project to move forward, the owner, or developer, organization, etc., must have the money on hand to actually pay for it. While this can take the form of cash in the bank, the funding for a project can also come in the form of a loan from a private institution or from a pool of investors. On the public side, projects are funded from the tax pool, whether that be on a local, state, or federal level, at least here in the States. Both public and private work can also be funded through grants, or money that's essentially given to the project under certain rules and conditions to help fund it. Grants can be funded by both public and private sources. But back to our example. Once the owner has the money to pay for the project, which is of course the first logical step, what happens next? On most projects, there are a variety of costs that the owner must pay up front before the first shovel ever breaks ground. So let's go through a few. Two of the most important upfront costs to both the owner and the general contractor are bonds and insurance for the project. I'll go through the finer details of what both entail in future videos, but let's summarize them here to give you some context. Insurance for a specific project, although paid for by the owner as part of the total project cost, is technically purchased by the general contractor. This insurance financially protects both the owner, the GC, and any other relevant parties against some kind of loss while construction is underway. For a bit more information about insurance, feel free to pause the video here and check out the information on the screen. Bonds, on the other hand, are a form of surety. A surety bond is essentially a guarantee to the owner by a third party that they will step in and pay the owner for any financial loss, should the contractor default on their obligation to finish the work. Once again, feel free to pause the video here and read the info on screen for a bit more information on bonds. Just to reiterate, both bonds and insurance are upfront costs, and that they must be paid prior to work starting. So they're in place once the work begins on site. Although the contractor purchases both, they are technically paid for by the owner as part of the total project cost, and the contractor is able to bill their client for the cost of each once they've obtained them. Another type of cost that's often billed for before work ever begins are deposits on materials and equipment. This can include items that have a long lead time, i.e., they take a long time to get, and therefore are financially secured as early as possible in the timeline, so they don't arrive late and delay the job. Another reason to purchase materials before the project starts is if the fabrication of said materials will require lots of certain raw material that's affected by fluctuations in the market. A good example is raw metal, like steel, stainless steel, copper, bronze, and so on. An owner may elect to secure this material when it's at a favorable price, or if they predict the price will be going up in the near future. And lastly, an upfront deposit may be required to secure the rental of a specialty piece of equipment required to do the job. These are just a few examples. It ultimately comes down to what the contractor and client agree to pay for upfront. And rounding off the list of costs that are billed to the owners before work starts, at least in some instances, are mobilization charges. Mobilization effectively consists of setting up a job site in preparation of starting work. This can include things like establishing a field office, securing the site with fencing and gates, and other similar items. If you're interested in learning more about job site logistics, I've put a link in the description below to a video I made on the topic. Some of these costs could also be paid for out of pocket by contractors at first, but are quickly billed to the client in their first monthly billing cycle. We'll get to the monthly billing cycle shortly, but let's talk a bit more about out of pocket costs, as they are extremely necessary from an operations standpoint for contractors and the project alike. Picking up where we left off in the previous section, out of pocket costs are absolutely critical to keep the project moving forward, both at the beginning of the project all the way through to the end. In fact, out of pocket costs are more critical to subcontractors than to the GC, purely from a financial sense, which I'll explain momentarily. Like I said before, some of the costs that I listed as upfront costs can technically be out of pocket costs by the contractors before the first invoice is ever sent to the owner. Even if the GC or a subcontractor bill for the work the first day that they begin on site, they likely won't have the payment in hand for several weeks. That's why revenue collected upfront before the project starts helps give contractors a head start of sorts, as they can use this upfront money to fund the work rather than completely pay for it out of pocket. But let's talk about costs that are in fact out of pocket. To fund these costs, contractors must either already have the money on hand to pay for them, or have a line of credit they can charge them to. Types of credit include bank loans, credit cards, or a line of credit the contractor has with specific vendors. Funding the work on credit has one major benefit, assuming the contractor isn't paying interest on that amount. It gives the contractor time until they actually have to hand the cash over, often 30 days. This means the contractor can do the work using the equipment or material they bought on credit and hopefully get paid by the owner before the credit bill is due. That way, the contractor already has the money in hand for the equipment or materials they now have to pay for. But realistically, even in the best of conditions, there will likely be a window of time between when those bills come due and when the contractor gets paid. This is a good time to introduce the nature of construction costs and cash flow on a project as it's happening. The nature of construction is that it's a pay, then get paid business, which is to say, contractors must pay for the cost of equipment, materials, and of course labor forces first. And then once they bill the owner and the invoice is approved, they get paid for what they did. Of course, by the time they do get paid, they're already spending money on the next month's worth of work. Therefore, contractors are always effectively chasing after their true profit, continuing to spend money working in order to get paid more until the very end of the project. I'll talk about how this works in a future video, as well as ways the contractors plan around this. But for now, all you need to keep in mind is that contractors have out-of-pocket costs throughout the life of the project. So it's vital that they both have cash on hand, as well as invoice their clients and get paid efficiently. The most important out-of-pocket cost is labor. Why is that, you ask? Well, people working on site generally get paid every week. So the contractors need to have money on hand at the end of each week in order to make payroll and pay their workers. Labor costs are the most important and liquid cost on any project for that reason. Not to mention, a project could never get done without the people who physically do the work. At the end of each month, the general contractor will submit an invoice to their client. These monthly invoices are known as progress billings, in that these invoices bill the client for work that was done during that particular month, throughout the entire project. Some GCs perform portions of work themselves and need to account for labor, equipment, and material costs they had during that month. But in many cases, the GC's invoice will include all of the invoices they get from their subcontractors for work they did. It's worth noting that some GCs don't perform any work themselves, but rather contract it all out to various subcontractors. In either case, each of the subcontractors who performed work during the month will, in most cases, be able to submit an invoice for what they did. This means that each subcontractor should be able to bill for the total cost they spent on labor throughout the month, as well as equipment they used, materials they installed or at least secured, and other costs, plus overhead and profit, of course. Bear in mind, most subcontractors are doing the work for a fixed amount of money, so they're billing for a portion of that total. Subcontractors must submit their invoices to the general contractor, who then goes on to bill their client accordingly. But there's a step that takes place in between. And now, before we move on to the next category, I'd like to take a moment to mention that I offer virtual one-on-one coaching sessions. As I said at the start of this video, I'm a civil engineer by background and a commercial construction manager by trade. And it's a true joy to pass on the skills and experiences I've picked up along the way, while learning the hard way in the process, frankly, to help new project managers in their own journeys. Whether you're a new project manager just starting out and you're looking for guidance, or if you're a more experienced PM looking to discuss a detailed topic, I offer both 30 and 60-minute Zoom sessions. If you'd like to learn more, or if you're looking to book a session with yours truly, check out the link in the description below to schedule an appointment at your convenience. The contractors working on site will need to project out, or estimate, the total value of the work they plan on getting done that month before they reach the end. In some cases, subcontractor invoices are drafted in the middle of the month. Given that this is an estimated amount, these mid-month requisitions, or invoices, are known as pencil requisitions, and that they must still be approved at the end of the month by the GC before it can be officially invoiced to the client. The benefit of submitting invoices mid month like this is so that they can be reviewed and approved by the GC and ready to go to the client right away by month's end. This helps shorten the window between when the month officially ends and when payment is issued. In kind, it minimizes the time between when contractors pay out of pocket for their work as it's happening and when they get paid for what they did. How exactly do GCs go about reviewing and approving their subcontractors' invoices? This is done on a percentage complete basis. Subcontractors typically break down the total amount of their work into specific items. Along with this are specific portions of the total value of their work allocated to each item. This cost breakdown is what's known as a Schedule of Values, or SOV. For more information on the Schedule of Values in construction, I've linked to a video I did on this topic in the description. But back to our example. Let's say that this month, the concrete subcontractor expects to pour 20% of the total amount of concrete required on the project, in terms of total dimensional volume. Let's also say that the total value of their concrete work is $1 million in their Schedule of Values, or their subcontract is worth $1 million. This means that in the first month of work, the concrete subcontractor will be invoicing for 20%, or $200,000. In real life, the amounts that are charged may be more complex, and that a subcontractor might charge for multiple items with varying percentages of completion for each respective item. The important thing to know is that the estimated value of the work is often based on percentage completed, and the GC must agree to it based on what's actually done before the client is invoiced. So once all of the subcontractor invoices have been approved, and the GC has accounted for their own costs as well, they send the compiled total invoice to their client. Like we said before, this is often done by or immediately following the end of the month, for the month that just passed. Clients will then need some time to review everything being billed for, to ensure they aren't overpaying in terms of the value of work that was actually done. Clients may also require that certain documents are in hand before they can approve the requisition package. These documents can include anything from updated insurance policies, confirmation of materials being ordered, payroll reports for all contractors that performed work, copies of permits, waivers signed by subcontractors, and so on. These are just a few examples. What's most important from a cash flow perspective is how long this process takes, or more specifically, how long it'll be between when the client first gets the invoice from the GC to when they're cutting the check. The time frame allowed for in this process is often outlined in the contract. In this example, let's suppose the contract gives the client 30 days from the day they receive the invoice to pay the GC. Let's now fast forward to when the owner finally releases payment to the GC. As you can see, the check for the first month's work is cut 30 days after the client was invoiced, or right around the end of the second month, i.e., the time when the GC is preparing to submit their invoice for the second month's worth of work. It's very important to note that the client does not actually pay the full value of what they're being billed each month. The client holds back, or retains, a certain percentage of the invoiced amount until the project is officially complete. This is called retainage, and is often 5% or even 10% of the total value being invoiced. The actual percentage will be established in the contract for the project. This payment effectively repays the GC for the money they spent last month, plus a little. But the GC has spent money since then too, so they're still net out of pocket at this stage in terms of total revenue versus cash flow. In this way, payments that the GCs receive typically come in between 30 to 60 days after the GC spends the money on cost for that project, depending on when that cost hit their books last month. But now let's remember, a good portion of the GC's cost for that first month's invoice are in fact the value of work performed and billed for by their subcontractors. The GC's costs truly hit the books once they issue a monthly payment to each of their subcontractors. But by that time, they've typically already been paid by the owner for what the subs invoiced. This is because the general contractor gets paid by the owner or client before the subcontractors do. By the time the client is paying the GC for the first month of the work, many of the subs have been working on site for 2 months. This means that subcontractors have had to pay for a good portion of their work out of pocket in both the first and second month of work on site, just to keep work going, especially when it comes to payroll for their labor forces. It's also important to remember that per contract, the GC is also allowed a certain amount of time between when they're paid by their client and when they must pay their subcontractors. This time period can vary from a week up to as late as 30 days after getting paid themselves. On the longer end, this means that a subcontractor might get paid as late as 60 days after the end of the month they billed for, which can also mean they're paid between 60 and 90 days after they actually spent the money to do the work, depending on the timing of when those costs hit their books in the prior cycle. Furthermore, subcontractors are usually held to the same retainage percentage as the GC. So if the client withheld 5% of the GC's invoice value, the GC will in turn withhold 5% of the sub's invoices, assuming they haven't reached a different arrangement. So in short, the payments subcontractors receive often lag 60 days behind the end of the month in which they invoiced the work. So if they submitted their first invoice at the end of October, they may not be paid for that work until the end of December. It might be sooner than that, but it would not be uncommon for it to be 60 days. But as we said in section 1 and 2, subcontractors may have received some payments before work begins, but that only covers so much. Now, once subcontractors have been paid, they'll put most of, if not all of that money, right back into the project to keep things moving, at least in the early phases. This is because all the while, the subcontractors have had to pay for worker payroll each week, as well as pay invoices and for other various purchases as work continues on. To reiterate, subcontractors often rely on lines of credit to defer when they actually have to relinquish the cash to pay for their costs, which help their cash flow line up a bit closer to the billing and payment cycle of both the client and the GC. Said in another way, this helps shorten the time window between when an invoice becomes due and when the sub has actually been paid for the work that the invoice involves. But still, subcontractors are essentially net out of pocket in terms of cash flow until the project is just about done, because they're always spending money to do the work before they get paid. In consideration of retainage as well, many subcontractors aren't truly making a profit in any real sense until they get their final payment. If a subcontractor makes 20% profit margin on their work, that means 80% of their contract value is made up of hard costs, which include, of course, labor, equipment, and materials. By the end of the project, the vast majority of the costs the sub has incurred to do the job have been paid, either out of pocket or using the funds they've collected. And since the GC holds 5% of the total value as retainage on top of that, which is only released near the end of the project, the final 1 or 2 months payments are the most critical for all contractors, as they cover the actual profit generated on a gross profit sense. Hopefully, to wrap up the discussion, it's important to realize that the invoicing and cash flow process on a construction project is cyclical. The steps we've gone through repeat every month, and some projects last for multiple years, meaning there are 20, 30, 40, or even more billing cycles that take place between the start and the end of the job. Some of the contractors whose work falls early in the project timeline may be done and mostly paid, with the exception of retainage, before other later stage contractors have even started. What stays consistent is that the GC invoices their client every month, and the client pays for the portion of the total project that was completed each month too. And that, my friends, concludes today's exploration into the details of the billing process on a large commercial construction project. After walking through the steps involved and examining closely how the cash flow works on a project, let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. And if you enjoyed today's video, liking it and sharing it with someone you think would find it helpful would be much appreciated. Sharing our content in this way is a huge help to the channel, and your support does not go unappreciated. And if you'd like to stay in touch for future videos, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'd love to see you around here next time. And make sure to click that bell button as well so you'll be notified the next time we upload a new video. And last but not least, if you are interested in a one-on-one coaching session with yours truly, check out the link in the description below for more information. You're also welcome to email me with questions at any time. And most importantly, thank you for watching. This is PM Problem signing off, and until next time, cheers.